This Saturday, Floyd Schofield III takes on Tevin Farmer on the undercard of Jake Paul vs Julio Cesar Chavez Jr. This is Floyd Schofield's first fight since he pulled out of his WBC lightweight title shot against Shakur Stevenson on the Bivol Beterbiev 2 undercard on Fight Week back in February. Now, the 18-0 up-and-comer Floyd Schofield is the favourite going into this lightweight bout with Tevin Farmer. Schofield is the young undefeated fighter on the rise. He is a Golden Boy promoted fighter, this fight being on a Golden Boy card, and Tevin Farmer is the older fighter who one might say has passed his heyday, and Farmer is on a 3-fight losing streak. Farmer is a former world champion, but he's 5.5 years removed from being a world champion, and after he lost his IBF super featherweight title to Jojo Diaz in early 2020, Farmer was then absent from the ring for 3.5 years. Then he returned to the ring to pick up 3 consecutive wins over opponents who were essentially journeymen. Then Farmer took those 3 losses in a row, to Murutalla and then William Zepeda twice. Also, by the way, Tevin Farmer is not signed to any major promoter, and he's definitely the B-side fighting against Schofield on this Golden Boy show. Now, under those circumstances, no matter what the catches are, the guy in the position of Floyd Schofield will always be the betting favourite. I don't want to make this too much about gambling, but the point here ain't about placing bets or any personal experiences right now, so don't worry. It's just that the odds here really do tell the story in regard to the balance between how each fighter's in-ring abilities will affect the outcome of the bout, and how the politics at play will likely determine the verdict. Because you only have to have looked at boxing odds a handful of times to know that they are conducive to A-side, B-side dynamics, sometimes even more so than skill sets and resumes. So as I mentioned, Schofield is the favourite and a young undefeated up-and-comer who is the A-side, so he will never not be the favourite against the guy coming off of 3 L's. But usually in such circumstances, the guy in the position of Floyd Schofield would be a sizable favourite, and of course the guy in Farmer's position would be a sizable underdog. The margins would be wide. So let's take a look at both guys' recent odds history quick and compare it to the odds of their fight against each other so we know what the implications of this fight are and why I was actually surprised when it got made. Pleasantly surprised and also rather confused. Of course, different bookies offer different odds, but against Murutalla last year, the first fight of Tevin Farmer's current 3-fight losing streak, Farmer was a 7-1 dog and Murutalla was a 1-16 favourite. Of course, Farmer was the B-side here. He's the nomad not signed to any big promoter, and he was fighting on a Top Rank show. Top Rank who promote Murutalla, of course. And Farmer did go on to lose to Murutalla on points. Then going into the first William Zepeda fight, the second fight of Farmer's current 3-fight losing streak, of course Farmer was the B-side again, fighting on a Golden Boy show. Zepeda being of Golden Boy obviously. Farmer was an 8-1 dog, and Zepeda was a 1-20 favourite. Farmer went on to lose by points again in the Zepeda fight. By the way, both Murutalla and Zepeda were heavily tipped to stop Tevin Farmer in those fights. I guess whoever made those odds for the Zepeda fight didn't see the Murutalla fight. Then going into the Zepeda rematch, things got a bit closer on the odds, with Farmer as a 5-1 dog and Zepeda as a 1-8 favourite. So yeah, the odds got closer despite Zepeda defeating Tevin Farmer the first time around. I'm sure most of you know why, and we will get into it. But yeah, Zepeda would beat Farmer by points again in their rematch, and Farmer was then on a 3-fight losing streak. So Farmer has been a massive dog in his last 3 outings, was hardly given a chance one might say. Now Floyd Schofield is of course still a prospect, so he has been a favourite going into all of his fights that have actually taken place. Let's just take a look at the odds in his last 3 fights to make it even. For Floyd Schofield's third most recent fight against Ricardo Lopez Torres, Schofield opened as a 1-50 favourite. In his second most recent fight against Esteri Suero, Schofield opened up as a 1-13 favourite. And in his most recent fight against Rene Tellez Giron, Schofield opened up as a 1-10 favourite basically. So yeah, he's came in as a huge favourite for his last 3 fights, and he of course won them all because he's still undefeated. So in this fight between the guy who has been a massive favourite in his recent fights in Floyd Schofield, and the guy who has been a sizable underdog in Tevin Farmer, we would expect wide odds, right? Especially given that the bookies got it right for both men each time. Schofield won all of those fights as the favourite, and Farmer lost all of those fights as the underdog. But the odds for this upcoming fight between Floyd Schofield and Tevin Farmer are awfully close compared to the odds that we just looked at. Schofield is a 4-7 favourite, and you'll get Farmer as a 7-4 dog on one bookie, but he's mainly floating around at 6-4 or less. So for the odds to be that close of all the A-side, B-side dynamics, what I'd say that pretty much means is that Tevin Farmer is the much better and more experienced boxer than Floyd Schofield, but Farmer is not so likely to get a fair shake on the scorecards, to keep it real. The second that I saw this fight got announced, I didn't check the odds. The first thing I did is put up a community post saying Farmer schools him and gets robbed. Now, I don't think the difference in resume and experience that Farmer has over Schofield really needs to be explained, whether or not you think that Schofield can get the win because he is the younger and hungrier fighter who is ever improving and Farmer is washed up. But for me to say Farmer gets robbed, perhaps that means that I reckon Farmer got robbed in one of those last 3 fights of his. Maybe 2 of them. Maybe all 3. I ain't gonna lie, I've gone around saying Farmer got robbed in his last 3 fights in kinda tongue-in-cheek fashion, but there's a level of serious to it, I'm not gonna lie. So before we even look at how Schofield and Farmer match up, let's take a look at Tevin Farmer's last 3 fights. So as for my perception of Tevin Farmer's last 3 fights before re-watching them to make this video, I did watch Tevin Farmer vs Ray Murutalla live, despite that fight being on at the exact same time as the more noteworthy fight between Boots Ennis and David Avanesian. Well, I actually had both on at the same time, but I was way more looked into the Tevin Farmer fight, so maybe that exposes that I'm a rampant Tevin Farmer fanboy and everything I say in this video ought to be taken with a pinch of salt. And at the time, I thought that Farmer clearly beat Murutalla. Unfortunately, I can't find my actual live scorecard because that would have been on my old phone that I ran into the ground until it stopped working like I do all my phones, or maybe I didn't even score it, I don't know. But Farmer was deducted a point in that fight, meaning that if he won the fight 6 rounds to 4, he would have only won by 1 point. But I believe I remember having Farmer winning by a margin, so I probably would have given him 7 rounds, maybe even 8. I reacted to this result at the time with a short. It's a whole minute long, so I won't play it here now. I'll link that atop the description. That one was from early O.M.E boxing days, man. Channel was barely 2 months old at that point. But yeah, I thought that Farmer won so clearly, but Murutalla ended up winning it unanimously on the cards, even winning 97-92 on one card. You may not believe that this fight was a robbery, but you know that 7 rounds out of the 10 to Murutalla is kinda crazy. Farmer didn't beat Murutalla up or anything, but I remember Farmer pop-shotting Murutalla here and there with decent jabs and straight lefts to the body and stuff, while Murutalla just wouldn't let his hands go at all. By the way, that fight took place in July 2024, less than a year ago, and I had not rewatched the fight since it happened live. Then for Farmer's first fight with William Zepeda in November 2024 on the undercard of Zurdo Ramirez vs Chris Smith, I didn't actually watch that one live, but I heard right away that Farmer knocked him down and all that, and I ended up watching the highlights back straight away. Then I watched the full fight back not too long after, and I'll be honest, I specifically remember not scoring this fight when I first watched it back in full, which would have been my last time watching it in full before researching for this video. But I remember being pleased that Farmer was competitive with Zepeda, that he scored the knockdown over Zepeda, he had good moments, made it the distance, and actually got the nod on one of the 3 official judges' scorecards. Yes, it was a split decision win for Zepeda in the end. One judge had it 5 rounds apiece out of the 10, which is a Farmer win with the knockdown. This was a fun fight and a close fight. A judge's nightmare, one might say, but with the fight being that close, despite the knockdown, with all these A-side B-side dynamics, dare I say, Farmer was almost lucky to get as much respect as he did on the scorecards. I'll be honest, I do remember seeing Zepeda doing the better work all round, you know, volume-wise, kinda outworking Tev. But boxing is scored on a round-for-round basis, of course, and I did not watch it through that lens the first time. So you only have to give Farmer 4 rounds outside of his knockdown round to give him the win. So a Farmer win is feasible, but no way was Farmer robbed here. So yes, when I say Farmer got robbed in his last 3 fights, I am joking. Giving Zepeda 6 out of the 10 rounds in that first fight looked fair to me, despite me not scoring that at the time, but yeah. But I do remember people saying that Tevin Farmer was robbed here, which we will get to. Now Farmer vs Zepeda 2, a 12-round main event in Cancun, which happened just 3 months back. Golden Boy Promotions actually gave Farmer the rematch, and I came to learn after the fight upon listening to Bernard Hopkins on All the Smoke Fight that giving Farmer the rematch was Bernard's doing. Of course, Oscar De La Hoya runs Golden Boy, but B-Hop is his right-hand man and does have some say. And Farmer is B-Hop's fellow Philadelphian, so he did him the favour there. You know these Philly guys will never let you hear the end of it. Especially Farmer himself actually. I'm from Philly. But I don't really mind it because I happen to like most fighters from Philadelphia. I don't really care about Philly as a city. I have no affinity at all to any cities or states in America at all, in fact. But there are a bunch of fighters who I really like who do just happen to be from Philly, innit? Oh, and the Rocky movies are set there too, so it's a decent little boxing city, I guess. Anyway, Philly aside, Farmer was arguably more of a B-side going into the rematch as it was in Zepeda's home country of Mexico, so Farmer was coming in as the foreigner. Now, I did watch this fight live, and I remember this being an amazing fight with great moments from both men. But I personally saw Farmer just taking over in the later stages, and I actually gave the fight 7 rounds to 5 in favour of Farmer in the end. As a matter of fact, here is my actual scorecard. As you can see at the top here, it says 5:23 AM, which is when I would have been watching it at the time. That's what we go through here in the UK on a weekly basis, man. Just for you Americans who think you're hardcores just for staying up for a fight in Japan every other month. I do remember thinking that round 11 could have gone either way, so a draw would have been very fair, and I remember exactly what the talks were right after the fight. That Zepeda had made the adjustments to beat Farmer more convincingly this time around. You know, everyone was referencing the CompuBox stats. They were talking about Farmer being hurt multiple times. Well, Farmer was very hurt from the first round when he injured his hand, but anyway, anyone who thought Farmer won the rematch was stamped down as delusional. But one of the official judges did actually score the fight a draw, by the way, so it was a majority decision win for William Zepeda in the rematch, in Mexico. I remember not seeing the fight how everyone else did. I did not take the CompuBox stats for gospel, and even if the numbers were true, Zepeda outlanded Farmer 344 to 152, which again I just don't really see being true anyway. Farmer's shots had a lot more pop on them on average, I'd say, and Zepeda's punches were probably more concentrated within the first half of the fight. So on the round for round basis, Zepeda could be landing way less punches in the later rounds than he was in the early rounds, thus losing all those later rounds, which his overall punch count does not account for on the scorecards. I actually did a community post right after the fight and then the day after the fight giving my little take, and you know what, I'll just read them both out here. So right after the fight, Farmer vs Zepeda 2 was a great fight again. I'm not surprised with Zepeda getting the majority decision, but 116-112 Zepeda is highly questionable. I had 115-113 Farmer, but I'm not going to cry robbery. Zepeda definitely dominated the first half of the fight. He swarmed Farmer completely and even hurt him a couple times, but Farmer was still game and kept catching Zepeda with his vicious uppercuts as Zepeda was coming in. That's why I had Farmer nicking a couple rounds in the first half. And the two men were trading body shots, which was fun to see, but Zepeda outworked him in that department. But even though I did have Farmer nicking the 8th round off of the counters, round 9 was the turning point for me. That's when he slowed the fight down to his pace and was just pop-shotting Zepeda, who couldn't find his rhythm at that point, or was possibly tired. Farmer then definitely won the 10th, 11th was close but I edged it to Farmer, and then in the 12th, Farmer was arguably robbed of a knockdown, and he was whipping Zepeda in the final round. So fair play to Tevin Farmer. All 3 fights of his last fights, I think that's meant to mean all 3 of his last fights. Obviously, again, this would have been like 5:30 in the morning while I was writing this. But yeah, all 3 of his last fights in his comeback could have arguably gone his way. But 3 losses in a row? Man, it's really unfortunate. I wonder where he goes from here. And as for William Zepeda, Shakur next. I mean, he's the interim champ for Shakur's belt. I have Shakur outboxing him though. And obviously now Zepeda is fighting Shakur. Then, the day after. Not the morning after, because I would have been watching the fight in the morning. Tevin Farmer vs William Zepeda 2 is one of those fights that has me pondering for the whole next day. Well, technically the same day. Again, it's not a robbery, but I do think that people were misled by the crowd and the broadcast team. As I said before, Zepeda dominated most of the first half of the fight. Loads of jabs, body shots, and he was swarming Farmer with all of these combinations. However, Farmer's punches were actually rocking Zepeda's head back and stopping him in his tracks. But the Mexican crowd understandably made more noise for Zepeda's swarming pressure, and you had Farmer riding with the shots a lot of the time, but the commentary team allowed the fans to believe that Farmer was hurt. But when Farmer would rock Zepeda's jaw, yes, the commentary team would acknowledge the punch, but they failed to acknowledge how much more significant the single shots that Farmer was picking than Zepeda's volume and high output of less effective punches. Furthermore, I believe the CompuBox numbers were a straight up lie. Yeah, that's what I said, I guess. I'm yet to rewatch the full fight, but I just watched back the highlights, and I know that they are only 7 odd minutes long, but it does fail to paint the picture that Farmer dominated the last 4 rounds. But the highlights do manage to show Zepeda's early dominance. Fair play to Zepeda though, it was a great performance and he made the fight great too. Also fair play to Farmer for fighting injured for nearly the whole fight. Yeah, probably meant to say nearly there. Remember, he did injure his hand in round 1. After a fight like that, I wanted to do an immediate reaction video, but I was unable to at the time. I'm still focusing on the Ben Eubank videos right now, but I might even do a full piece on Tevin Farmer at some point in the near future, or maybe on his career comeback. I guess we can just count this as the Tevin Farmer video. Also, yeah, back then I was just locked into the Eubank Ben stuff. I was literally not making videos about anything else. Oh yeah, and I'm glad I'm not betting right now in this Lenten period, because I would have put loads of money on Farmer, I'll be real. And although I'm not saying that this fight was a robbery, I might be crying robbery if I had lost a couple £100 on it. So I guess that was my take at the time, innit? Now, I haven't been too vocal about my take on the verdict of Tevin Farmer's last 3 fights because I have only seen each of them once each, and I guess I must just have a deluded take on all of them because nobody sees them how I do. And it's not just about me being a rampant Tevin Farmer fanboy, because I don't think he got robbed in the first Zepeda fight, but a lot of people do say that he was robbed there, which I do not agree with. So off my dome before rewatching the fights, Farmer vs Murutalla was a blatant robbery, but I don't even hear anyone speak about that fight at all, so I guess nobody else was in uproar, or I guess I'm just being deluded. And perhaps I was distracted by looking up at the Boots vs Avanesian fight here and there, so I didn't actually watch the fight properly. Farmer vs Zepeda won, the robbery talks. I guess I don't see a robbery here because I didn't score it round for round. Perhaps if I did, then I would have given Farmer 6 rounds, a 96-93 card with the knockdown. And then in that rematch, apparently Zepeda did so much better than he did in the first fight, and Farmer did not, and it was a clear Zepeda win. Now I had an inkling in my mind that I was reluctant to be vocal about because of how unpopular it is. But to me, there looked to be quite a bit more of a case for Farmer winning the rematch than there was him winning the first fight. Again, it's not about me being a Farmer fan, because I didn't think he did enough to win the first fight convincingly at all really, although many people did. I wanted to say something like, casuals just think he has more of a case for winning the first fight because of the knockdown, but I didn't want to go for that cliche, and I wanted to keep stum before watching each fight for a second time. Now, I'm going to be honest here. As for me rewatching all 3 of those fights just now, it was a waste of time, as my opinion has not changed one bit. Don't get me wrong, I enjoy watching fights back, so it wasn't a waste of time in that regard, but based on how people speak about those fights, I thought my opinion was due to change, and I'd come into this video with a more objective take, let's say. I was watching with an open mind, as I expected my opinion to be changed, but my original inclinations about each of these fights stay the same after rewatching them, so maybe I just need to trust my intuition. Or perhaps I'm just deluded and stubborn and unable to learn from my mistakes and still don't know how to watch a fight properly. One or the other. Farmer vs Murutalla now. So I did score the fight when watching it back just now, and yeah, I had it 96-93 for Farmer, as you could see on screen here. That's 7 rounds to 3 for Farmer, minus the point deduction in the 8th. Farmer just clearly outpointed Murutalla in my opinion. Landed with jabs and straight left hands, and Murutalla struggled to find a home with anything. Murutalla was on the front foot pressuring, and he would try to create an angle to find a home with a clean shot, which wasn't successful most of the time. Farmer was moving around the ring, and Murutalla couldn't really track him down. And when Farmer was stood in front of Murutalla, or when Murutalla got to him, Murutalla looked stuck, like he was waiting to pick a shot. Then Farmer would just pop out a straight shot that would land. Farmer schooled him, I'll be real. And Murutalla has now gone on to become the IBF lightweight champion, won the interim belt against Zaur Abdullayev, then got upgraded to full champ when Lomachenko retired. So Farmer lost a robbery to a guy who went on to become a full world champion within a year. I gave Murutalla round 5, which I just edged to him. I also gave Murutalla round 9, and I gave Murutalla the 10th and final round, which was a round that was going well for Farmer. Actually quite a bit better for him than a lot of the previous rounds that he won. But Murutalla hurt Farmer in that round, so I had to give it to Murutalla. As for the point deduction for Farmer, you could kind of say it was unfair. He was deducted a point for clinching, and Farmer was initiating a lot of underhooking to hold and frustrate Murutalla, which is illegal, but we didn't see much in the way of hard warnings before the deduction. But Farmer got robbed on the cards anyway, so the point deduction would not go on to matter. He would have just lost a majority decision as opposed to a unanimous decision if he was not deducted a point, as one judge had it 95-94 to Murutalla, which was 5 rounds apiece, so yeah, Murutalla won one of the cards off of the point deduction. Now in terms of me saying it's a robbery, I know a lot of other content creators like to preface the robbery talks with the term robbery is overused in boxing, but I ain't going for all that. Just because a lot of casuals call close fights robberies and thus watering down the term, it doesn't mean I can't use the word in its correct context. And speaking of, Farmer vs Zepeda won now. This was definitely not a robbery, but I'm not gonna lie, I did score the fight this time around and I just edged it to Farmer, as you can see. Perhaps a lot of people wouldn't give Farmer round 1 or even one of the later rounds, so a 96-93 card for Zepeda wouldn't even be so bad. But I gave Zepeda the 5th round, and I believe the broadcast team gave that round to Farmer. So yeah, a few swing rounds there. And remember, Farmer only needs 5 rounds to win, and Zepeda needs 6 because of the knockdown that Farmer scored. But if you give the fight to Farmer, then you probably have to give him a couple more swing rounds than you'd have to give to Zepeda to have a Zepeda win, if that makes sense. But either way, either man could win this fight 95-94, which is why a split decision win for Zepeda was a satisfactory verdict. And luckily, Golden Boy would go on to bless us with a rematch. And yeah, I thought the same thing again watching their fight for a second time and actually scoring it this time, or trying to score it. The fight was a pleasure to watch, great action, but it's just a nightmare to score and even to call. There were moments where I saw Zepeda doing his thing and the commentary were praising Farmer, and vice versa of course. The Sky Sports commentary team that is, as they posted this fight in full on their YouTube channel. There were many momentum swings in the duration of each round. Zepeda was the pressure fighter here and was throwing a lot of combinations to head and body, but because he was right in front of Farmer, Farmer planted his feet to whip in big shots that got through clean, which made for a fun scrap. Again though, judges nightmare, so if I do a whole round for round for this then we'd be here all day, but the Zepeda win is fine at the end of the day. Farmer vs Zepeda 2 now. I'll refrain from going in on this for too long as well because this is a mere pre-fight video for Tevin Farmer vs Floyd Schofield this weekend, but watching this rematch the second time around, I did not actually score it. I just watched it back to make sure that my live experience of watching the fight wasn't completely skewed and swayed by bias and delirium, but the fight is just how I remembered it. Who knows them ones when you're watching a fight back and you literally remember most of the punches you see and you're like, oh yeah, the uppercut he landed, let's say, let alone remembering the big moments. Round 11 was also a swing round as I remember. The end of the fight was just Farmer's for the most part, but the 11th was Zepeda's best round in the latter stages. And rounds 1 and 3, which I gave to Zepeda, were actually decent Farmer rounds to be honest upon rewatching. But there is more of a case to give Zepeda the 11th than to give Farmer the 1st or the 3rd. So although I say there's more of a case for Farmer winning the second Zepeda fight than the first one, this rematch is still not a robbery. Only the Murutalla fight was a robbery, I'll be real. Of course, Zepeda was just swarming Farmer and completely outworking him in the early going, even hurt Farmer to the body badly in round 5. That was a big moment. A lot of instances in this fight may have seemed like big moments for Zepeda, but Farmer was fine and would just be riding with shots, but the Mexican crowd were just going crazy for everything. But Zepeda did hurt Farmer in the 5th round for sure. And in those later rounds, I just saw Zepeda's relentless pressure drop off a bit and Farmer was ripping in shots to the head and body on the Zepeda that stood right in front of him. Shots that had snap on them and stopped Zepeda in his tracks. Go and watch the full fight back if you can. The highlights on DAZN's YouTube channel don't paint the full picture at all. Both fighters had a claim to a knockdown in the fight as well, neither of which were scored. Zepeda in the 9th and Farmer in the 12th. They were both questionable and they both weren't scored, so they cancel each other out in terms of controversy anyway. And yeah, it would end in a majority decision win for William Zepeda. One judge having it 6 apiece, which is totally fair. One judge having it 7-5 to Zepeda, which is also fair. And the other judge had it 8-4 to Zepeda. Now, most people would say 8-4 is fair. I saw people in certain comment sections even say 9-3 to Zepeda. But to me, you'd have to be awfully kind to Zepeda to give him 8 rounds in that fight. I'm sounding like Eddie, no way was that 116-112 Hearn over here. Just back to the knockdowns and how it could have changed the verdict. If you give Farmer his knockdown and don't give Zepeda his, Farmer would have lost on a split decision anyway, as opposed to a majority. Wait, unless a couple of the judges gave the 12th round to Zepeda, then changing that round to a 10-8 to Farmer would change the points a lot. But how the official judges scored each individual round isn't available on BoxRec, so who knows. Before I actually look at Floyd Schofield now and how he matches up with Farmer, I don't want to sound crazy here, but I beg one of you, please tell me that you thought there was more of a case for Tevin Farmer winning the second Zepeda fight than there was for him winning the first. Just one of you. This might be the most unique take. I ain't heard anyone else say it. Because people who are actually fanboys and have an actual personal bias would say that Farmer clearly got robbed both times. There are a bunch of people that say the right man won both times, and people who are more down the middle or even on the side of Farmer a bit but trying to be objective would say that Farmer should have won the first fight but not the second one. The opposite of my take pretty much. Look, whether you thought Farmer lost both times or that he should have won both times, or if you scored the first fight to Zepeda and actually gave the rematch as a draw or a Farmer win, surely there's one person out there who thinks that there's more of a case for Farmer winning the rematch. I'm not actually this much of a casual. Some of you guys might need to teach me how to watch fights properly. As for the Raymond Murutalla fight, I'll be real, I don't think most people even watched that fight. Most people would have watched the Boots fight live, and trust me, most people are not saddos like us. Unless there's a massive fight that someone misses for a big reason where they literally couldn't watch at all, or if someone missed a fight for whatever reason then went on to find out that it was a fight of the year contender or something insane happened in it, most people don't watch full fights back like that. So even some of the bigger content creators or people in the industry, apart from those working for Top Rank I guess, didn't watch this fight at all I reckon. So there's not really much narratives out there about this fight amongst noteworthy outlets. So Floyd Schofield now. The kid has most certainly shown to be a good athlete in his fights. He's explosive and he attacks well, and he also definitely does have some boxing ability, but this has been seen against limited opposition. And although he was a very promising prospect not too long ago, a really young guy racking up a lot of wins, right now he kinda has the status of a plum. In his very last fight against Rene Teles Giron, he did have a bit of a mare despite winning clearly. Couple of bad moments in that fight. And then he was meant to fight Shakur Stevenson next, And we would never expect a prospect of Floyd Schofield's level, who hasn't really stepped up in competition yet, to take on a Shakur Stevenson. Didn't really deserve a world title shot in all likelihood, but the young'uns usually don't want to take the risk and go for a big fight before they pad their record up a bit more. So from where I stood, despite the fact that Schofield didn't really deserve a world title shot, and that the fight wouldn't have done much for Shakur, I rated that Schofield was rolling the dice and taking that big step up so soon. Because Schofield had been calling Shakur Stevenson out. You know, he was calling him out after his last fight against Giron, and apparently he had been calling him out on social media too. So at least he actually took the fight with the big star of the division, instead of saying that he wasn't ready yet when the big offer was made. But then Schofield pulls out of the Shakur fight on fight week due to this mysterious illness, which we were apparently meant to see all these receipts about. Receipts that would have proved that people on Team Shakur Stevenson apparently poisoned Schofield and had been antagonising the Schofields for months. But we ain't seen any receipts yet. I mean, it's obviously a possibility that if people behind Shakur Stevenson were such a threat that they would have threatened the Schofields to not show the receipts. But conspiracy theories aside, the Schofields kinda looked like idiots after that pullout. And Shakur was hardly so scared to fight Floyd Schofield that he had him poisoned so he could fight Josh Padley instead. Oh, and back to all that odds talk, I could have swore I saw Schofield go as high as an 11-1 dog shortly before that fight was cancelled. I think he opened at like 13-2, but he just became more and more of a bigger underdog until the fight ultimately got cancelled. But as for those last 3 fights that he was a favourite coming into, well, he would have been a favourite in all of his fights anyway. But his third most recent fight was a first round blowout of Ricardo Lopez Torres. That was a low level of competition there, but he did what he had to do against such competition. Second most recent fight was an ugly fight that he ended up winning by DQ. That was against Esteri Suero. Suero ultimately got DQ'd in that fight as a result of a bunch of different fouls that he had committed. This Suero guy had a reputation for being a dirty fighter because of that fight that he had on the Rolly Romero versus Ismael Barroso undercard, in which he was deducted 3 points. So I don't know why Golden Boy brought him in for Schofield, but that was just an ugly fight. Then that most recent fight with Rene Giron in November, that was Schofield's first 12 rounder, so it was quite a step up. Giron had never been stopped before, so it was due to be quite a tough test. But Giron isn't a guy who has achieved much in his career, and he's quite a small lightweight, so Schofield was very much expected to beat him, of course. Schofield was boxing nicely in the early going against Giron, and he was switching stance a lot. And just to say now, Schofield is known for bursting into range to lead with explosive attacks. And from what I can tell, Schofield goes southpaw when he wants to be nice with it and box around, leading with the jab and being on the back foot, and he goes orthodox when he wants to put the pressure on and jump in with those attacks. In round 3 now, Floyd Schofield got rocked by Giron. Schofield got insanely trigger happy and started coming in close and swinging for the fences with left hooks, and in close, he got caught with a tight right hand from Giron that had him shaken. As Giron went to follow up, Schofield completely turned his back after a shot that was barely around the back of the head to complain about it. Real amateur stuff there. Schofield then tried to make up for that with a big attack at the end of the round, but he looked exhausted at the round's end and actually missed the stall in the corner when going to sit down. It was a bad look for sure. Schofield's pace did slow down a bit after this round, but Giron wasn't looking great himself and Schofield would pretty much continue to outbox Giron. It wasn't the nicest fight though, and he would fail to hurt Giron at any point. Funnily enough now, during the 9th round, Chris Mannix on commentary said that Schofield is years away from a Shakur Stevenson fight.
But Floyd Schofield is years away from a Shakur Stevenson fight. Years away from that.
Which is crazy as the Shakur fight got made right after that. But obviously it wouldn't happen in the end, so I guess Mannix was right. In round 11 now, take a look at what would happen.
A little sloppy now here in the 11th. That could be a knockdown. That's a 6, 7, 8. Look at me.
Yes, Giron dropped Schofield clean. Schofield looked a bit weary after the knockdown, but he got stuck in again, which is good for entertainment value. But if he's having these little scrappy moments against this lower quality of opposition in which he's leaving himself open, how's he going to look against the big boys? He ought to play it safer, surely. But yeah, Schofield clearly won the fight and he got a unanimous decision win in the end. 2 of the judges had him winning every round, bar the round he was knocked down in. So as for how Tevin Farmer and Floyd Schofield match up in this 10-round lightweight affair, I do reckon that Tevin Farmer whooped Schofield, I'll be honest. I already went for that stupid video title that everyone uses to try and get this joint in the algorithm, but that levels above line that they all put in the thumbnail would have been fitting here too. Despite being on a 3-fight losing streak, Farmer put on good performances against top level lightweights. As I said before, Murutalla is now a world champion, And both Farmer's fights with Zepeda were actually WBC interim title fights, and Zepeda will now go on to fight Shakur Stevenson for the full WBC lightweight title in a few weeks, off of his 2 wins over Farmer. So Farmer had 3 fights in the space of a year against 2 guys who are at the top of the lightweight division, and there is a case for him winning each of those fights. He made it tricky against Murutalla, and Murutalla couldn't do much damage at all. Farmer's experience prevailed there, and against Zepeda both times, Farmer sat down on his punches, made Zepeda pay for standing right in front of him, dropped him 1 time, and I don't want to say rocked him a few times, but definitely stopped him in his tracks, landing nice big scoring shots, and he showed a great deal of endurance in those Zepeda fights too. Schofield now. He has looked good in his fights for the most part, but it's against a way lower level of opposition than Farmer has been facing. Obviously Farmer is years removed from being a world champion, but he has fought those 3 big fights he is coming off within the last year, so we know he's still on it. Schofield has shown that he isn't the tidiest boxer as well, especially against Giron, his only fight in the last year. Schofield can get caught. He doesn't always react the best to being hurt, and he's a bit scrappy the way he jumps into range and stuff and gets a bit trigger happy. Probably doesn't have an awful lot of power too. Schofield got dropped by Rene Giron in his last fight, and Farmer dropped Zepeda in his last fight, which came more recently than Schofield's last fight. And Farmer didn't get dropped once by Zepeda in his 22 rounds boxed against him. So there's levels here, man. I don't see what threat Schofield poses to Farmer and his breadth in experience. When Schofield does that thing when he bursts into range with an explosive attack, he sort of has to stand in front of his man to load up on that movement. But with the way Farmer punished Zepeda for standing right in front at times, I reckon Schofield will set his feet to try and lunge in, and Farmer will just whack him with a left uppercut first, because Farmer don't need to be too close to land that one, and that would stop Schofield in his tracks, and he won't end up doing whatever he was about to do a lot of the time. And as I said before, my interpretation is that Schofield often goes to the orthodox stance to do those attacks, but he tries to box nice out of the southpaw stance. But we know that Schofield ain't about to box Tevin Farmer around, let's be real. And if Schofield tries to get stuck in when he's in the southpaw stance, there will probably be more openings for Farmer. Farmer is of course a southpaw himself, and he landed way more shots against the fellow southpaw Zepeda in both of their 2 fights than he did against the orthodox Murutalla in that fight. Took way more shots against Zepeda too, but that's because the Zepeda fights were just way better fights than the Murutalla fight, way more eventful. I think being in the same stance as Farmer opens you up to more shots from him, mainly the left uppercut to the chin and the lead right hook to the body from my casual eye. So Schofield switching stances is unlikely to cause the veteran Tevin Farmer any problems whatsoever, I reckon. It was hardly causing Rene Giron problems. Not that Schofield didn't win that fight clearly, but the stance switches in particular didn't make Giron's night any more difficult than it would have been otherwise. I do think that this fight does go the distance though. If one guy was going to stop the other, I would go with Farmer to stop Schofield, but it's rather unlikely. I don't want to go too crazy on the robbery theory, but I reckon that Farmer has to clearly win 7 of the 10 rounds to get the nod on the cards. He got a decent shake against Golden Boys Williams Zepeda both times out to be fair, apart from the 116-112 in fight 2, but you can never be too sure, man. Of course, by the way I'm talking, I do think that Farmer can win 7 of the rounds clearly, and I think he'll do some damage on Schofield too. I'm almost certain that Schofield won't clearly outbox Farmer for a convincing win. However, if the fight is in any way competitive, if Schofield looks like he nicked 4 of the 10 rounds, or if there are some swing rounds in there, maybe if Schofield just wins a couple rounds clearly and then there are 3 swing rounds, which is very possible by the way, I don't think Farmer is just guaranteed to smoke him, I do see Schofield getting the nod on the card in such an instance, hence Farmer schools him and gets robbed. That's why it'd be good to see Farmer score a knockdown here. That's what really tightened things up on the cards in the first Zepeda fight, which from where I stand, if it was that exact fight but without the knockdown for Farmer, you'd have to be quite generous to give Farmer the win there. And Schofield obviously got dropped by a random in his last fight, so the knockdown is very possible for Farmer. With a knockdown, Farmer could of course get a win on any card that gives him 5 rounds, so yeah, a knockdown would be good for him. Maybe 2 knockdowns, which is possible. Just to note though, there is a reason to predict that Floyd Schofield will clearly defeat Tevin Farmer, and that would be off of the chance that the 12 rounds that Tevin Farmer just had with Zepeda 3 months back, or even the 22 rounds that he's boxed with him within the last 7 months, has taken a lot out of him, and we will see an actual worn out version of Tevin Farmer going into the Floyd Schofield fight, because of those 2 wars with Zepeda. And Schofield is beyond fresh of course after not fighting Shakur Stevenson. I doubt Schofield's carrying any wear and tear at all. Look, this is a possibility, and I reckon that if Floyd Schofield does beat Farmer clearly, then that will be the reason why. That Farmer now does have too many miles on the clock. That's not to say that if Floyd Schofield wins against Farmer that I'll be saying Schofield only won because Farmer was cooked from the Zepeda fights. No, please. I'll be giving Schofield a great deal of credit for what would be his best career win by a mile. not just against a former world champ, but a guy who has looked good lately as well. And if revisionist history goes on to discredit this win from Schofield as he beat a guy coming off of 3 losses, you know, if guys in the future say that Schofield's win over Farmer isn't valid because Farmer was on a 3-fight skid, that would probably come from guys who hadn't seen any of those 3 fights. I'd be the one trying to stamp those talks down and uplift the validity of the win for Schofield due to the nature of the 3 losses that Farmer suffered going into the fight. So trust me, despite me not sounding like I'm the most fond of Schofield in this video, if he wins this fight clearly on Saturday, he gets all the credit in the world from O.M.E Boxing. Not that my opinion matters at all, but that's just to say that I ain't about to do no hating. Alright, so elsewhere on the card there's also a cruiserweight world title fight, the co-main event, in which Zurdo Ramirez defends his unified WBA and WBO titles against Yuniel Dorticos. Dorticos being a former 2-time world cruiserweight champ. Well, 1 time if you don't count the WBA Reggie belt. Dorticos was always good, but he's a bit past it now, and he never gained a successful title defense when he was champion. And Zurdo is yet to defend his unified titles, but he picked up that WBO belt right after winning the WBA belt, and he's the fresher fighter, so Zurdo is rightly a big favourite here. If Zurdo wins as we expect, all we want to see him do is unify with the IBF champ Jai Pattaya, the fight that Zurdo has been avoiding. And if Zurdo does beat Dorticos as we expect, I shall be producing a video in which I put together a hypothetical Matchroom vs Golden Boy 5 vs 5 card, which would of course be headlined by the Cruiserweight World Title unification between Golden Boy Zurdo Ramirez and Matchroom's Jai Pattaya. That would be massive. But of course Jai Pattaya would be very much expected to win that one. So Zurdo most likely defeats Dorticos this Saturday to defend his belts, and then Zurdo most likely loses to Pattaya in the 3-belt unification if he does take the fight. So from that front, the cruiserweight division seems rather predictable, providing the fights get made. But a potential Zurdo Ramirez and Jai Pattaya unification fight only solves 3 of the 4 belts. The winner would not be undisputed cruiserweight champion. So as for the WBC belt held by Badou Jack, I mean, the future of that belt is really unpredictable. Now, I didn't want to acknowledge the Jake Paul fight in the main event of this card too much, not to be some contrarian, but it's because Jake Paul obviously wins. It's not a thing where he's finally fighting an active pro boxer now, one who's not 58 years old, after only fighting old MMA fighters in boxing matches before this, because before Jake Paul was ever meant to fight Chavez Jr, I always said that Anderson Silva is Jake Paul's best win by far, because Anderson Silva had defeated Julio Cesar Chavez, or former world champion boxer, in a boxing match. So Jake Paul beat a guy who beat an actual boxer, or former world champ. But since the loss to Silva 3 years back, Chavez has gone further into drug addiction and depression. So even though I already gave Jake a bit of credit for beating Silva because Silva beat Chavez, what does it prove now for Jake fighting a guy who lost to somebody that he already beat, and a likely way worse version now of the Chavez that lost to Silva? But I will acknowledge the Jake Paul fight now, because apparently Jake Paul wants to go for Badou Jack's WBC Cruiserweight title after this win. The same Badou Jack who won the vacant WBC Cruiserweight title against Ilunga Makabu on the co-main event of Jake Paul vs Tommy Fury back in 2023, funnily enough. So I guess Jake Paul likes to get Cruiserweight world title fights on his undercard. I'm not too sure if Jake Paul is privy to the fact that the WBC have ordered a rematch between Badou Jack and Noel Mikaelian though, after Badou Jack defeated Noel Mikaelian in a disputed decision win last month. And Badou Jack is old, 41 to be exact. So if he goes ahead with the Mikaelian rematch, which he must do to keep his WBC title as the rematch is ordered, he will probably do it as late as he can get away with probably, end of the year perhaps, instead of going for a quick turnaround from the first fight. Probably needs time to recover. And now, on the same night as the Paul vs Chavez card but on a different fight card, the 42-year-old ex-light heavyweight world champion Jean Pascal fights Michal Cieslak for the vacant WBC interim cruiserweight title. So I'm telling you guys, anything can happen with the WBC Cruiserweight title in the near future. If Badou Jack does not go through with the Mikaelian rematch and gives up the world title, I reckon that the winner of Pascal vs Cieslak, the would-be interim champ, would fight Noel Mikaelian for the vacant full WBC Cruiserweight title, which is very possible. And if the Jack vs Mikaelian rematch does go ahead, who knows who wins that one? The first one was so close, hence the rematch. So yeah, I definitely remember hearing somewhere that Jake Paul wants to go for Badou Jack's WBC Cruiserweight title, but that belt is so up in the air and is liable to be held by Badou Jack, Noel Mikaelian, Jean Pascal or Michal Cieslak after it is next contested for. And it will have to be contested for by Noel Mikaelian before anything due to the ordered rematch. Unless the WBC just allowed Jake Paul to override everything and get a shot at Badou Jack, which wouldn't be so surprising. But out of the 4 guys in question, I reckon Jean Pascal was the one who Jake Paul could most likely defeat, as Pascal was the oldest and he's not actually a cruiserweight. So if Pascal just gets by Cieslak and then somehow beats Norm Machalian in a vacant title fight, let's say, he'll be even more old going into his first defense of the WBC cruiserweight title against Jake Paul. So Paul could possibly defeat him. Jake Paul would be the favourite against Pascal, I reckon, maybe because the fight would be rigged, but who knows. Now all that is hypothetical, but the only reason I'm looking at a way Jake Paul could become the WBC Cruiserweight Champion is because imagine if Jai Opetaia did get the Zurdo fight and became the unified WBA, WBO and IBF champ, and then he fought the WBC champ who ended up being Jake Paul in an undisputed fight. I know I just had to do a bunch of hypotheticals to get to that point, so let me not sell a dream here, but that would be the perfect comeuppance. Jai Opetaia finally becomes undisputed and Jake Paul finally gets brained. And if Jake Paul actually nicks his way to an undisputed world title fight, that does absolute numbers. Good for Jai as well, as that would be a massive money fight. It's crazy even talking about Jake Paul being a cruiserweight world champion anytime in the near future, as he has not beat one cruiserweight contender, not one. But money talks, and the WBC would just rank him off of no merit whatsoever, so that Jake can fight for their belts. So this is feasible here. Jai Opetaia would probably make more money off of fighting Jake Paul alone than he would fighting Badou Jack, Jean Pascal, Norm Machalian and Michal Cieslak one by one. The four guys in the WBC Cruiserweight title mix off of merit. But yeah, I did just want to mention the Cruiserweight title implications of the fights this Saturday night. We've also got a notable welterweight fight on the card too, with Raul Curiel going up against a fellow undefeated fighter, so that ought to be good and all. I forgot to say actually, I won't even be watching the Jake Paul fight live in all likelihood, because it's probably going to be on at the same time as Charles Oliveira vs Ilia Topuria, the UFC 317 main event. And the boxing is meant to be on a bit earlier, I think, in terms of the main events. But even if the Jake Paul fight's not at the same time as the Kai Kara France vs Pantoja fight, I'll be watching the Pantoja fight over that, because that's obviously a world title fight. I doubt this, but even if it is early enough, the Jake Paul fight that is, to be on at the same time as Joshua Van vs Brandon Royval, I probably will have the Jake Paul fight on, but I'll probably watch it at the same time as the Brandon Royval Joshua Van fight. And if I do miss the Jake Paul fight live, I'll probably just watch back the highlights. I'm not some next Jake Paul hater, I don't need to like rebel against him being like, oh yeah, to try and sound hardcore, but it's just, obviously I'm a big fan of boxing and MMA, but I wouldn't pick to watch Jake Paul over any actual accomplished boxers or MMA fighters at world championship level who I've been following. If it was the only fight on at the time, I'd most definitely watch it. Obviously I watched Jake Paul vs Mike Tyson live, I'm sure we all did. Other than that, I think the only Jake Paul fight I watched live was the Nate Diaz fight, which I did kind of enjoy. I was talking about his Anderson Silva win being his best win earlier, but I haven't even seen that full fight. Didn't watch it live. I think I watched the last few rounds back the next day, but yeah, so there's a very big chance I won't be watching Jake Paul live at all. So yeah, obviously I'll be watching Zurdo Ramirez live and Tevin Farmer vs Floyd Schofield, needless to say, because I've dedicated a video this long to that fight. But yeah, Zurdo Ramirez, gonna watch that fight, no UFC on at the same time, and then the second the winner's hand gets raised for the Zurdo fight, I'm probably just gonna switch over to the UFC. And then yeah, if the flyweight title fight start in the co-main event, then yeah, I'm gonna have to just forget about the Jake Paul fight, to be honest. Boxing obviously takes priority, so I'll obviously watch Zurdo Ramirez over Pantoja versus Kara France, but yeah, I'm not willing to compromise UFC world title fights for a Jake Paul fight at all, I'll be honest. So yeah man, Farmer vs Schofield, that is the fight I'm looking forward to the most on the weekend, so I thought I'd dedicate a video to it. I think Farmer can actually win this time around, so I'll be damned if I don't put at least 3 figures on him to win this time after the money I've lost on backing him in the past. Well, I didn't bet on the second to pay the fight because that was during Lent and I wasn't gambling then, but this time, money is going on Farmer. Although I spent a lot of time explaining why Farmer is only a marginal underdog because he's the better boxer, but he's just a dog because of the A-side, B-side stuff, to be honest, I really wish Farmer was as much of a dog as he was for his last 3 fights, because then I could put a little poxy couple £100 on him or something light and break even for my current gambling losing streak if he does win. But unfortunately, he's not enough of a dog for me to bet on him on a single and potentially break even on my gambling losses overall on him with a disposable amount of money. But the return would be nice either way. The losing streak I'm on now has been diabolical. Not because of the sum of money I'm down by, but by the things I've lost money on and how it's played out, and some of the bets that I've fumbled and stuff. And a lot of it has been on boxing. But all that matters is that I don't let my betting losses skew my boxing takes on this channel. I lose the money, reload with a cup of coffee and a cigarette, then I'm live and I bounce and get back to work with my ever objective and educated boxing takes in these videos, right? Please do let me know you guys' takes on the verdict of Tevin Farmer's last 3 fights in the comments though, especially the Murutalla fight in fact, because again I don't hear much people talk about it. Unless you're a Tevin Farmer fan or a Ray Murutalla fan specifically, then why would you have watched it over the Boots Ennis fight live? Only other reason is if you have ESPN in the US or Sky Sports in the UK and you don't have the Zone and you're not one to stream fights, so you just threw the Top Rank card on the TV. And I'm not sure how many people would have watched the fight back after missing it live. Just a 10-round fight without any direct world title implications. I know a lot of my viewers are hardcore fans though, which is weird because I'm a casual, so perhaps some of you did watch that fight, so yeah, let me know. This one's been a long pre-fight video, but this is the first time I'm properly talking about Tevin Farmer in a long form video. I've held back on this because I'm anti-fanboyism. You know the Americans, oh, you's a Ryan Garcia fanboy, or you's a Devin Haney fanboy, or a Tank fanboy, or Shakur fanboy, or Tio fanboy, or whatever. And I'd hate to be referred to as a something fan, not even fanboy, just a something fan, like someone else's name and then fan after it, as a description of me. But I can't help myself when it comes to Tevin Farmer, I'll be real. I don't know why. So I used a title on thumbnail that would be indicative of a little cutesy video with generic takes that appease to the average YouTube boxing content consumer, but I ended up going this long on just marking out to Tevin Farmer and giving deluded and very unpopular takes. But yeah, thanks for listening to this casual waffle on for this long. Like and subscribe, and you have been listening to O.M.E. Boxing.